Hi, I'm Linda Mechner, back again with Why Eating Healthy is Not Enough. I'm here today with Christina Bjorndal, a naturopathic doctor who is an expert on food and mental health. Christina, would you like to tell us a bit about you and how you got into this line of work?
Sure, yeah. So I haven't always been a naturopathic doctor, and it was really my own journey with my mental health that brought me to make a career change to become one. And what happened for me was in high school, I developed an eating disorder. And so I had bulimia, and that morphed into some other health challenges, such as depression and anxiety. And when I got to my third year of university, I was really not in a very good place. And I ended up being prescribed an antidepressant, which I took. And then a few months later, I found myself in another place that I'd never been before, which was spiraling out of control, having little to no sleep. And eventually I had a full-blown delusional, psychotic, manic episode. And it took 6 people to wrestle me into a straitjacket, and off I went to the hospital, where I was sort of left in a rubber room and to come back to reality. And then I was given the diagnosis of bipolar disorder type 1. And what I did with that is I basically put it as far away from me as possible. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I didn't want to accept it, acknowledge it. And I just continued marching on in the world, wearing this mask that, you know what, I'm doing okay. But really, I wasn't always doing that well on the inside. And then I eventually, fast forward several years, I'm working in the corporate world, but still struggling with mostly with depression and anxiety. And then I had a suicide attempt, which left me in a coma with kidney failure, and I was on dialysis and told that I would need a kidney transplant. And I can tell you, when I came out of that coma, I certainly wasn't happy that I was still here. But for me, it was really the turning point, because up until then, I had been at war with myself and not accepting these labels that I had been given. And so that was the turning point for me to figure out another way to navigate this journey. And eventually I learned about nutrition, and I went to see a nutritionally oriented psychiatrist named Dr. Abraham Hoffer. And I started his supplement protocol. And within a year, I had my first year where I was free from depression and anxiety, which I hadn't had in the 15 years prior to that. So I knew that there was something to this. And I then, looked at my life, and after asking myself the question, if money didn't matter, what would I be doing? The answer that always came up for me was go back to school and study to help people regain their mental health the way that you have, like learn what Dr. Hoffer, did for you so that you can do that for others. And so that's my 30-year history. And
That's such an incredible story. It's so dramatic. I mean, there's a lot of us in healing professions, we came to it because of our own experience, but yours is very, very dramatic. And in hindsight, do you see eating habits or specific things that you were doing that exacerbated what you were experiencing, or was it more like, this is just a weird hand that I got dealt, and now I need to figure out how to manage it?
Yeah, so an interesting thing is, three comments. First of all, I just want to mention that prior to the eating disorder starting, I did a year of antibiotics to treat acne. And so we know now, right, the relationship between the gut and the brain. But back in 1982, whenever, back then, nobody was talking about that. Right. So it just really highlights the importance of taking a case and really diving into your patient's histories. So that's one thing. The second thing is I am adopted. And so whenever I would ask the question, why is this happening to me? The answer I always got was, well, it's genetic. There's nothing you can do about it. And while I'm not saying that there may not be a genetic piece to this, for me, I couldn't verify the truth of that. So I never accepted it as the truth. And I continued to look for other answers. And in that process of inquiry, I learned about the field of epigenetics, which is basically to explain the difference between genetics and epigenetics. It's that genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Right. So it's really about the environment that can turn the genes on or off. And so to come back to your question about the food piece, so for me, I had a horrible diet, a really bad diet. And I was a vegetarian, but there were barely any vegetables in my vegetarian diet. I was like, let's be honest here, I was a carbitarian, basically, right? And so, I mean, I lived in my apartment for 7 years and I never used my oven. It was...
Okay. I think you froze.
Second year, we had to do an assignment about analyzing our diet. And I analyzed my diet, and I was deficient in something called tryptophan. Well, I was deficient in a few things, tryptophan, B12, and iron. But the thing that's eye-opening about tryptophan is it's an essential amino acid. So what that means is nobody has the ability to make that within our own body. We have to get it from our diet. And the important thing to understand about tryptophan is it goes on to make something called serotonin. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is involved often in depression and anxiety. So it's a feel-good chemical that our brains need in order for us to feel good. And actually, another point about that is a lot of the serotonin is made actually in the gut as well. So again, coming back to this idea that there's a relationship between the gut and the brain.
Yeah, that's so key. And maybe just for those who are not aware of what neurotransmitters are, maybe you could just explain what neurotransmitters are and how they work in our body.
Yeah, so just simply put, they're chemicals that are contained in a neuron in the brain. You have mostly neurons in your brain, and at the end of the neuron contains different neurotransmitters. And so these are just chemicals that then get transmitted when that neuron fires, and it goes across to the next neuron and binds and has a relationship in terms of how we feel. With depression, anxiety, there are also with addictions, and there's neurotransmitters that are considered inhibitory and neurotransmitters that are considered excitatory, sort of two main classes, but I won't get too technical on them. Just understand that they are chemical messengers in the brain that can affect how we feel. And the most commonly discussed one is serotonin.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So tryptophan was missing in your diet. And so what did you do to change that? What foods did you add into your diet to help produce more supply you with tryptophan to make the serotonin so that you could feel positive moods, right?
Yeah. So that's really the important thing to understand is I was feeling better because Dr. Hoffer gave me supplements, right, to support that pathway in the body. The tryptophan pathway, not to get too biochemical, but there are nutritional cofactors that are required with each step along the pathway. It goes tryptophan to 5-HTP, then to serotonin, and then to melatonin. So the food, basically, it's any protein. So we need to be eating turkey and beef and chicken and tuna and salmon. So basically anything that's in the protein category. And if you are a vegetarian, then the vegetarian sources would be avocado, peanuts, cashews, oatmeal. Those are the top 4 ones. And then depending on whether you eat dairy or not, cottage cheese is high in tryptophan. So basically for me, because I was a vegetarian, I wasn't getting those amino acids that I needed. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. And so how long did it take you after starting the supplements for you to start to feel a difference? Did it take you like a few days and you started to feel the effects, or was it weeks or months before you said, wow, this is really making a difference?
For me, it was about 2 months. Yeah, it was about 2 months. And I was still taking pharmaceutical medication at that time as well. But I wasn't doing, like, I didn't feel I was getting the results with the pharmaceutical medication. So I carried them both along for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not against taking pharmaceuticals. It's just that I feel that my philosophy is, minimum dose for maximum benefit for the shortest duration of time. And
Right.
I know they can be very helpful for people. They've been helpful for me at times. But then, sometimes with depression, you get far down, and it's hard to it's hard to find that yourself on solid ground. And so when you get there with taking perhaps an antidepressant, then you can put the foundational steps in place. Like, we can work on the diet, and we can get the exercise piece going, and make
Right.
sure the sleep is happening, right? So those things are often hard to do when you're really struggling.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I find is that when people are trying to make changes to their diet, they don't even have the capacity to make simple changes because they're so debilitated in whatever way, whether it's depression or physical, mental, emotional fatigue, not having the skill set, feeling like they're on the steep side of the learning curve
Mm-hmm.
with some of the technical pieces of it. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
you don't know how to make nutritious food, it's really hard to conceptualize eating better.
That's right.
But what would you say are some of your top tips for somebody who maybe does have bipolar or depression or something like that? What are some of the ways or some of the things that they could do in their diet specifically to help them up level their capacity?
Mm-hmm. So I can't emphasize enough how important this nutrition piece is. I mean, everything you put in your body informs your body in one way or another. And another piece of this is also important that I just want to touch on is also the environmental piece.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a lot of chemicals in the air, food, and water, and these can also play a role in our health too. So just being mindful, again, it's one thing to start eating better, and then if you can, then incorporating the organic piece is also another sort of step to up level yourself. But just a basic place to start is really to make sure that you are shopping around the perimeter of the grocery store, as best as you can. I know sometimes we have to go up and down the aisles to get perhaps a bag of rice or something like that, but trying to make your foods as whole and without labels as best as you can. And then trying to make sure that half of your plate is at least vegetables, and then the remaining a quarter of the plate having protein, and then perhaps a complex carb. And if you could make one meal like that a day for yourself, if that's not what you're doing already, then that is a huge improvement, I would say. And not worrying, it doesn't have to be super complex. It's just, I keep things pretty simple, but I am focused on, okay, I'm making sure that I'm getting the vegetable piece and not always eating the same thing. Like, I was talking to another clinician, and she was saying that she encourages her patients to have 200 different plant species in their diet in a year.
What?
So that, yeah, if you think
that's a lot of counting.
that's a lot of counting. So that would be eating something different every 2 days, just about, right? So I was starting that for myself. I was thinking, I'm going to start that just to see, well, how many different species am I actually having? Because I can tend towards the same thing, avocado
Right.
and cucumbers and spinach and kale, and so trying to change it up as best as you can too, because you're wanting to give your body different messages, right? Not always the same message all the time. But I would say keep it simple. Another thing as well that I find just kind of boggles my mind, but a lot of people aren't just drinking enough water. and they're drinking too much pop or caffeinated drinks or coffee or tea, and just not enough pure water. And so understand that you're 70% water, and the minimum we need to be consuming is half our body weight in ounces. So people can do the math for themselves and start with that if you don't know where to start. I mean, that's going to make a big difference in your energy levels and with bowel function and your skin. And
so true. And it boggles my mind of all the things that people can be doing for their health. Two that are most lacking are absolutely free and, at least theoretically easy to do. And that is sleep and hydration.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't matter what else you do. If you're not doing pretty well in those two things, everything else is you're not going to get the result from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I explain when I'm working with people is you have to understand that there's 4 aspects to you, right? Physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And our Western system focuses on that physical. And that you have to understand that there's these 3 macro systems in you. So you have the neurotransmitters, you have the neuroendocrine or hormonal system, and then you have your organs of detoxification. And all 3 of those systems, if something is out of balance in one of those systems, that can affect your mental health from anxiety or depression. And I know for myself, I had to work on all 3 of those systems. So it's not, there's not just one sort of quick fix. It's really about looking at all of these things. So diet and sleep, exercise, right? Your stress levels, they all play a role. Yeah.
Right. So any hot tips for our listeners of, like if they could do 3 things in a day, what would those 3 things be?
Okay. So I would say, first of all, is to have a gratitude practice.
Nice.
I think that's really important to help work on our mindset and shift to gratitude. And the second thing I would say is move your body in some way that feels comfortable for you. So whether that's walking, running, biking, playing tennis, swimming, doing weights is also important. So, but moving your body in some way. And then just being mindful of the nutrition piece, always asking yourself, will this help me reach my goal? And, how is this informing my body? Is this giving me the right messages? Is this providing me with the building blocks that I need to make my hormones and my neurotransmitters? Or is this contributing to inflammation and to more of a stress response in my body? And, the biggest thing to try to decrease is sugar as much as we can. So really being mindful of that as well. And then, of course, the water that we talked about in the sleep. So,
right.
So many things to say, but that those would be a starting point.
Those are 3 fabulous tips. I love them all.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I know you have a free gift for our listeners. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's just basically, it's an eating guidelines for balanced mental health. And it's just a very simple place for people to start if they're looking for a starting point in terms of wanting to change something with respect to their diet. So I would say download it and then pick one thing. You don't have to do everything in a day, or you don't have to change everything overnight. It's about these small incremental gradual changes. So once you've got one down, then you build in the next one.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. It's so important to emphasize that you don't have to do everything all at once. Especially in a summit like this, there's so much good information, and it's really important to remember that all you have to do is 1 or 2 things. Really do it, and you get so much benefit.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, these summits are amazing, and thank you for hosting this. Yeah. The thing is, what I would say to the listeners is, what action are you going to take? So what's that actionable step that you're going to start with today?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and sharing about that mental piece. I think a lot of people, they understand hormones and maybe they know something about gut health, but I think that this neurotransmitter piece is really a new field for a lot of listeners. And thank you for coming and shining a light on it.
Yep. No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I will see you all on the next session.